webinar is focusing on bridging and belonging to strengthen social connection. We're so pleased that so many of you have decided to spend some time with us today. Healthy Places by Design's webinars are a component of our Socially Connected Communities Network, which builds and supports a movement to advance action that results in more socially connected and equitable communities. I'm Joanne Lee with Healthy Places by Design, and I'm joined today by members of my team who will be providing support to maximize your webinar experience today. Risa Wilkerson is our Executive Director. She's going to help facilitate the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Becky Snyderman is our Project and Events Manager and is serving as our chat manager for this webinar, as well as providing Zoom platform and logistical support. Before moving into today's topic, let's review some logistical items intended to create an atmosphere that supports group learning and engagement. First, the chat box. That is the space where we can share and learn with each other. Please use the chat box to add comments, reactions to what you're hearing, as well as any links to related resources that you think could be helpful for others. Be sure that the setting in your chat box is to everyone when you're introducing yourselves and sharing comments. Now, if you happen to need one-on-one logistical support during today's webinar, then direct your chat to Becky Snyderman so Becky can provide you with prompt support. Participant chats can be a great way to gauge how the webinar content is resonating. However, if you find that the discussion in the chat is too distracting because it's scrolling very quickly, know that you can always close it and disable the chat notifications using your Zoom menu. Another Zoom menu item that I want to point out is the Q&A box. If you have a question for our guest presenters at any time, you can put them in the Q&A box, not the chat, but the Q&A box so that Risa can easily spot your questions and manage them, and we'll be triaging the most common questions that we can address during the Q&A portion of the live webinar. We have made closed captions in English available in this webinar, so feel free to also turn on that feature if it's helpful to you. A note that we are recording the webinar today. And yes, you will receive the recording and the slides from today's webinar within about a week. In fact, by joining today, you're going to be among the first to receive the webinar resources. So we just really appreciate the time that you're spending with us today. Now, let's begin exploring today's topic, bridging and belonging to strengthen social connections. So, most of us are very familiar. Bridging and belonging are necessary elements to achieving social connectedness at broad and impactful scales in our communities. We know that addressing isolation and loneliness at an individual level needs to be bolstered by community environments and systems that ensure opportunities for people to socially connect in organized and more informal ways, as well as on a regular basis. And these types of opportunities should not only bring together like-minded people, but also build relationships across differences. Because otherwise, it can create deeper silos of subgroups who don't feel a part of the community as a whole, or who are at odds with one another. Even in today's political climate, there is encouraging news. Research confirms that belonging is a fundamental human need, and there are successful practices for bridging that are working in communities across our nation. And we're going to hear more about this from our guest presenters, who I will introduce shortly. Before that, let's get a sense of whether you all are working to bridge across differences in your community. Becky is launching a poll with the question, are you implementing strategies to bridge across differences in your community? Yes or no? You can answer yes or no. And if you answer yes, please answer question 2 by sharing what that strategy is to bridge across differences. We'll give it a minute or so everyone has time to share responses. So far, we're almost even on yes and no responses to bridging strategies being implemented in communities. It's always great for us to see and hear what folks in communities are doing. So maybe we'll give it 15 seconds more, Becky, and then end the poll. And while we won't have a chance to share the answers to the strategies, we will definitely look through them after the webinar and maybe share some of those out in the follow-up email that you receive for attending today. All right, well, we've got more like 2/3 of you saying that you're implementing strategies to bridge across differences in your community, which is great because we will want to hear from some of you in the discussion group about what those strategies are. And I'll say more about the post-webinar discussion group. We'll say more about that at the end of the webinar today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. Calista Small is the research manager at More in Common. She leads and manages studies on a range of topics related to social cohesion and division in our country. Previously, Calista worked at Columbia University, where she researched stress in the context of interpersonal relationships, as well as mixed emotional experiences. Prior to her work in psychology, Calista worked in the arts as both a professional actor and producer, so she may look familiar to some of you. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Yale University and a post-baccalaureate degree from Columbia University. Kira Hamman is also joining us today, and she is Senior Director of Programs with Urban Rural Action. Kira also co-directs Uniting for Action Pennsylvania and facilitates urban rural action workshops in the Mid-Atlantic region. Previously, Kira was a faculty member in higher education, where her work included math and quantitative literacy to address public problems and community engagement among college students. Kira grew up in downtown Baltimore City and has lived on a small farm in rural Washington County, Maryland for over 20 years. And this is how she functions as what she describes as a one-woman bridge across the urban-rural divide. We're so pleased to have both Kira and Calista joining us. So I want to welcome Calista to the mic, and we're going to start with her. So, Calista, your organization, More in Common, has been engaged in building the field of social cohesion for a while now. And we have a deep appreciation for your approach, which involves both research and strategy. We are especially pleased to have you at this time on the heels of the release of your latest report that squarely addresses today's webinar topic, Bridging and Belonging. Please give us a bit of background about this latest report.
Hi, yes, of course. So before I talk about the report, I'll just introduce More in Common as an organization very briefly. So More in Common is a nonpartisan research nonprofit. As it says on the screen, our mission is to understand the forces driving us apart, find common ground, and help bring people together to tackle shared challenges. And we work with hundreds of groups in civil society, business, faith, education, philanthropy to connect people across lines of division. And today, More in Common has more than 50 people working across teams in France, Germany, Poland, Spain, Brazil, the UK, and the United States. So on to the new report. So for the past 2 years, my colleagues and I have been studying Americans' attitudes and beliefs about connecting across difference in the United States. And we had two main research questions going into this. We wanted to know, in this time of division that we're currently living in, who is interested in connecting across lines of difference in the United States and why? And second, what are the barriers to connecting across difference? And we focused on four main lines of difference: difference of race and ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, and political viewpoint. And to conduct this research, we performed 5 surveys. So we had 2 big national surveys and 3 regional surveys. For the national survey, we contacted about 4,500 US adults. And for the regional surveys, we surveyed adults in the Houston, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh metro areas. And we also conducted qualitative work at both the national and regional levels.
That's a lot of really great intentional work. And there really couldn't be a better time to have research data to really help all of us better understand this crisis of disconnection in our country and communities. And your research uncovered just some really important key insights. Please share them.
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk through 4 key insights today. And the first is that despite what we currently see in the media, a majority of Americans value connecting across lines of difference, and they're most interested in activities where they can work together to achieve a mutual goal in their community. So we found that 70%, 7 out of 10 Americans, say that they feel a responsibility to connect across lines of difference. And this majority actually holds across all major demographic groups.
I found that to be especially interesting that not only are people interested in connecting, but they feel responsible for it. A really important nuance, I think.
Mm-hmm. We also asked people how interested they would be in connecting across lines of difference more in the future. And we found that a majority of Americans said that they were at least somewhat interested in all of the activities that we presented. However, as you can see here, activities that involve working together and specifically working to achieve a mutual goal that improves your community have the most interest.
Mm. So these findings so far are really encouraging, Calista, and we know we can also learn from what the current barriers are in order to find better solutions. And I know that your key findings also included some barriers to connection.
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, if people are saying that they value this type of connection, they feel responsibility to do it, they're interested in doing it, why aren't they doing it more? So, we asked Americans what barriers are standing in the way, and we found that the most commonly cited answer was simply a lack of opportunity. So, I'm going to show some data on this. As you can see here, while people did list a number of barriers, the one that was most frequently cited was lacking opportunity.
Mm.
And so I'm going to move on to our third insight. So in this study, we also wanted to see what psychological factors best predicted people's levels of interest in interacting across difference. And we found that the 2 strongest predictors were these perceived community norms of connection and intergroup anxiety. I'm going to define those both now. So perceived community norms refer to the beliefs about how common and acceptable it is to connect across difference in one's community. So basically how much you think other people in your community value this and are doing it themselves. And intergroup anxiety refers to fear or apprehension preceding interactions with members from a different group. And I'm also going to present some data to back this finding up. I don't have time to explain this full graph in detail, but as you can see here, we looked at a lot of different psychological factors, and the 2 that really stood out as being the most predictive of interest in connecting across all four lines of difference together on average was perceived community norms of connection and intergroup anxiety. And so the final fact I want to share today is this idea that connection is cumulative. So the more people have an opportunity to connect, the more interested they are in connecting. And we coined this phenomenon a connection cascade. So as you can see here, in connection cascades, experiences of cross-group connection actually lead to greater interest in further connection.
These key findings are really providing hope and encouragement. And another critical piece of this report, which we will make the link available to everyone later in this webinar or in the resource guide, is the recommendations. And this is where really what can communities do given the current landscape of connection and disconnection. And so let's hear about the 6 evidence-based strategies that audience members can start or strengthen in their communities.
Yes, absolutely. So the first recommendation is also the most straightforward, which I actually think is really exciting. It's a very easy thing to talk about and hopefully do create more opportunities for people to make connections in their daily lives. So we can do this in 2 main ways. We can provide more opportunities for meaningful connection in spaces where people are already coming together. And the second way to do this is to design environments where new connections can happen naturally. I want to highlight 2 illustrative examples for how to do this well. So basically, any organization that is already facilitating interactions across lines of difference can create more meaningful opportunities for people to connect. So, for example, the Houston Food Bank in Houston, Texas is one of the largest food banks in the country. And I actually believe there are a few people from that organization on this call right now. So thank you so much for joining. So the Houston Food Bank, they bring people from different socioeconomic backgrounds together every single day to meet at the food bank. And so they decided to create an 8-week dinner series to help facilitate more meaningful social connection between these groups, while also having these groups work together towards the community goal of solving food insecurity in Houston. And at the end of this program, 90% of participants said they felt a stronger connection to their local community, and 90% said that they learned something new from other participants in the series. And my second example here is also from Houston. As I mentioned, Houston was one of our regional areas of focus. So we got to go to the Houston Rodeo. The Houston Rodeo brings together 2.5 million visitors every year. Yes, it's huge. And it's really big. I highly recommend going. It's a 3-week long event. And this event is unique in that it relies heavily on a remarkable volunteer force. So 35,000 individuals work every year to serve across 109 communities to make the Houston Rodeo run. So it's this huge cultural event that not only throws a really great beloved festival for the community, it also actively engages the community of Houston in meaningful connection across lines of difference through its very impressive volunteer opportunities.
That is really amazing. And both of these examples reinforce the point you made earlier that people connect better when they have a common goal.
Exactly. Yeah. The next main recommendation is to increase the perception that connecting across difference is the community norm. So as I discussed when I was talking about my key insights, perceived community norms that support connection across difference are the strongest predictor of interest in connecting across the 4 lines of difference that we studied. So this suggests that strengthening these norms of connection can be a powerful lever for change. But what does that actually mean? So social scientists have identified 3 main pathways to strengthen social norms. So you can change social norms through the media. You can do this through changing one's immediate social and physical environment, and then also through institutional policy. So in order to, In order to illustrate this better, I'm once again going to give 2 examples of what this kind of looks like in action. So the first is StoryCorps' One Small Step program. So this was launched in 2021, and the One Small Step initiative pairs strangers with differing political beliefs together for a 50-minute long conversation, not to debate politics, but to get to know each other's shared humanity. And then they film these conversations and they turn them into a really big media campaign. And the campaign, which has garnered now approximately 2 billion impressions, it included radio, TV, and print, as you can see here. And it features compelling messages that encourage people to engage in conversations across political divides. And More in Common actually partnered with StoryCorps, and we found that just listening to one of these conversations can increase the number of Americans interested in taking part in a similar conversation by almost 50%. So this is an example of how an organization can shift norms through like a big media campaign. The second is actually from my partner on the call, Kira from Urban Rural Action. I wanted to highlight the work that they were doing. So in a very deeply divided South Central Pennsylvania, participants in Urban Rural Action's Uniting to Prevent Political Violence program created and distributed yard signs and messages against violence that were displayed alongside Harris and Trump signs. And so in doing so, they were sending a powerful message about common values, and this helped shape community norms that political violence would not be tolerated by either side. So this was an example of shifting norms by changing small features to one's immediate social and physical environments.
I love this recommendation because it connects to a previous webinar we've done, Calista, on narratives. And
Yeah.
so the way you're using narratives really kind of touches on the aspect of what are the way you're talking about norms. What are the narratives in your communities that really are dividing versus bringing people together, and how can we change those?
Yes, exactly. So my last row of recommendations, I just wanted to go through briefly so we can move on to the rest of the webinar. So these are a little more straightforward as well. The third recommendation was to really focus and highlight on commonalities like shared interests or goals when wanting to broaden the appeal of bridging opportunities. The next one is to reduce intergroup anxiety through correcting misperceptions about one's opposing side, and also really teaching people skills to engage in intergroup dialogue. And Kira will highlight more of that in her presentation as well. And then seek opportunities to create connection cascades. And so what we mean by this is really just create long-standing programming to reinforce connections as opposed to just one-off events. One-off events are great, but in order to make sure you give people more opportunities to form meaningful connection and take advantage of that connection cascade where interest builds over time, you really want to make sure, ideally, that programming is continuous. And then finally, continue to work to foster local community belonging. So our data show that the more people feel like they belong in their local community, the more they express interest in connecting across all four lines of difference. So therefore, fostering a sense of community belonging is likely also an important aspect of supporting people's willingness to bridge differences.
Absolutely.
And yes.
Yeah, so we really appreciate you giving us the high level walkthrough of highlights from this report from More in Common. And it's just so incredibly important to our field, especially now. And I'm sure our audience will want to dive deeper into it. So tell us where they can learn more.
Yes, absolutely. So these are just the very top line findings from this report. There's so much more that we found. And if you're interested, yes, please do read the full thing. You can access the full report on our website here. We also created a typology of 6 approaches that Americans have towards connecting across lines of difference. If you're interested in really diving into understanding the psychological factors of these different approaches, I'd recommend taking a look at that interactive deck. And then also we have our regional spotlights. So if you're interested in understanding how geography and region help shape people's interest in doing these activities, you can take a look at those.
Awesome. It's a gold mine, folks. And so I'm sure that Calista's presentation about some of the highlights from the report have gotten your brains working, thinking about how does this relate to your community and your work. So again, please post any questions that you have for Calista in the Q&A box, and we should have plenty of time to address audience questions after we hear from Kira. So thank you so much, Calista. I'm going to welcome Kira back to the screen. And Kira, again, folks, is with Urban Rural Action. And so, Kira, let's also start with a bit of context about your organization and Urban Rural Action's approach to community bridging and belonging.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Joanne. And thanks, Calista, for setting the stage for this so beautifully. I have to confess, I'm a long time More in Common fangirl. And so I was so excited when I found out we got to do this together. I think that it was about a year ago that I got a tiny little hint that maybe this report was coming, and we at Urban Rural Action were so excited because it just is everything that we do, and it's really gratifying to know that that's what we should be doing, that it's working. So just a little bit of background on Urban Rural Action. We originated in 2019 as an organization in this country. Our founder and executive director, Joe Bubman, was engaged in international peace building work prior to that. And after the 2016 election in this country, he, like many people, sort of recognized that our country was exhibiting a lot of the same conflict dynamics that he was seeing in international conflict zones, and that was very concerning. And so he turned his attention toward the U.S. and brought a lot of those same tools and frameworks into the domestic context. So our vision is a more peaceful and democratic United States, very simple and straightforward. And our mission to get us there is to bring Americans together across divides to tackle our country's most urgent challenges. So how do we do that? Well, we have Uniting for Action local hubs, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But basically, the approach, you see the mission in the middle there, is those things around that circle. So increasing social cohesion, boosting civic participation, and strengthening local institutions are the big objectives that lead us to that central mission of a more peaceful and democratic America. And then those things parading around the outside of this circle are the techniques that we use to get there. Building relationships across difference, super important. Improving collaboration skills, lots of skill building. Calista was just mentioning how important that is. And then that third piece, which is the third leg of the stool, right, without which the whole stool would come tumbling down, which is taking action together to solve problems. So the action in the UR Action name is very, very important to us. It's central to who we are and to what we do. So those other things are also very important, partnering with local institutions to meet community needs. So making sure that what we're doing is not just dropping in from the sky, that it's actually aligned with what the community wants and needs and the issues that they are facing. And then at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is really a form of violence prevention work, because strengthening those community bonds and community cohesion leads to a safer community with lower risks of violence. Our guiding principles are parading along at the bottom there: finding strength and difference, taking action, and embracing curiosity. Curiosity is so important. You can go guess so far if you're just curious about other people. Centering communities, again, very community-centered work. Expanding participation and democracy. And then number 6, which is maybe even the most important, having fun, which gets an exclamation point even. It's so critical. At the end of the day, relationships are the foundational thing that builds belonging in communities, and having fun together is how you make those relationships strong and durable.
It's so great that you included that. Oftentimes that gets missed, fun and joy.
Indeed.
So, Kira, your Uniting for Action programs are actually featured in the More in Common report that Calista just spoke about. Tell us, what are the key elements of these programs and where are they being implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned our Uniting for Action local hubs. So local hubs include the Uniting for Action program as its foundational piece, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's the piece number 1 there, bringing Americans together to solve problems across difference where they live. The other 2 pieces of the UR Action Local Hub are our sort of light touch versions of the skills and frameworks that we do in depth in our Uniting for Action programs, presented in a public-facing workshop environment to reach a much broader swath of the community. And those are offered in collaboration with community institutions like public libraries, houses of worship, schools, because not everyone is able to commit to a 9 or 10 month ongoing program. So that allows us to have a much bigger reach in the community. And then the third one is a relatively new initiative that's actually super exciting, called Powering Pluralism and Democracy, which is sort of a version of a Uniting for Action program aimed at institutional leaders, with the explicit goal of making institutions more responsive, accountable, and transparent to increase trust in institutions. Because as we like to observe at UR Action, it's all well and good to say people should increase their trust in institutions, but in order for that to happen, the institutions have to increase their trustworthiness. And
It's
so the
another way
idea,
of getting at systems change, isn't it? By
yeah,
working with
exactly right.
organizations. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, exactly right. So the idea is to bring those same tools that we're doing at the individual level in Uniting for Action programs up to an institutional level. So I can talk a little bit more about the Uniting for Action programs, though, since, as you said, that's what was in the More in Common report. Can I have the next slide? There we go. So what do we do in our Uniting for Action programs? Uniting for Action programs operate within Uniting for Action hubs, which are in highly polarized communities. Of course, unfortunately, that describes most places in our country right now. So how do we choose? We also really prioritize going into areas where we can develop deep, enduring relationships in the community across all of the lines of difference that we're trying to bridge with the programs. So we go deep, not wide. When we're in a location, we stay there for a long time. I think that's maybe a version of the connection cascade that Calista was just talking about. Our program alumni go out into the community and their networks become interested, and often they move into program leadership. And so that does become this feedback loop where we become a trusted partner within the community that we're working in. So the programs themselves, though, the Uniting for Action programs are cohort-based programs. So they engage 25 to 35 community members across 4 or 5 contiguous counties in the same state. And those 25 to 35 people are very intentionally selected through a competitive application process to represent many backgrounds, many perspectives, many experiences. So they cross many divides, many lines of difference. Those are political and ideological, obviously, very important one in our country right now, but also race, religion, age is very important. And as our name suggests, geography. We work in areas where there are rural communities, there are urban communities, there are suburban communities, and often those communities, even though they're within a fairly small geographic area, don't interact a lot outside of the program. And so part of our goal is to bring those together. We also tend to focus on areas that include civic deserts. So areas where there's maybe not a lot of opportunity already for meaningful civic engagement. And our hubs provide that civic engagement, and specifically our Uniting for Action programs. So we have these 25 to 35 people across all of these lines of difference, across 4 or 5 different counties. We bring them together in person every 2 to 4 weeks, all day. This is a big time commitment, these programs. And the in-person gatherings rotate among the various counties that are in the program. And we do all of the things that I was just talking about a couple of slides ago. So we build relationships, always. That's a huge thing that we're always working on. We do skill building. We teach active listening skills, problem analysis skills, joint problem solving skills, skills for managing conflict when you have people trying to work so hard together across all of those lines of difference. Tension is inevitable. So we teach them to navigate that in a healthy way, which is also skills that then they can take out into the community beyond the program, which is great. That's about the first half of the program. And then the second half, each county team, so there's these 25 to 35 people spread roughly evenly among the 4 to 5 counties in the program. So there's maybe 6 to 8 community members from each county. Each of those groups is a county-based team. And that county-based team has a county coordinator who is a UR Action team member who facilitates that county-based team. The county coordinator always lives in the county. They're a community member within that county. And that each county team is also connected to a community partner organization, which I mentioned earlier. So in the first part of the program, that team does all of the things I just talked about with the whole cohort, but then they also develop an intervention. So they analyze the problem that's facing their community, and they they decide what they could do about it. So we have a very intensive problem analysis framework. And through that framework, the team is able to identify an entry point where they think that they can make a difference. And they develop an intervention to make that difference. And then in the second half, roughly, of the program, they implement that intervention with the support of UR Action, with the ongoing in-person gatherings, with the support of the county coordinator. And then towards the very end of the program, we talk about sustainability. The projects are widely varied. I'd be happy to give examples if you're interested. So sustainability looks really different in different contexts. It could be writing a grant proposal. It could be wrapping something into a community partner organization's ongoing operations. It just depends. But that's an important piece too, because we want the project then to be part of what ripples out into the community, doing all those things Calista was talking about, shifting community norms, reducing intergroup anxiety, all of that stuff. Is part of the results of the project, not just the project itself, even though the project itself is a really cool thing. Whatever they do is very cool and interesting. But the relationships that are built and their impact on the community is really the change that we're looking for in the community.
Really quick, Kara, on this, so maybe we can help folks maybe see themselves in as being part of one of these programs. First, what is the average length of time from start to finish for a program, you know, from sort of the gathering the people to the project implementation and evaluation? And then what are some examples of a community partner organization that might be well positioned to serve in that role?
Sure. So the programs have varied a lot. They're usually, a full-scale program is about 9 months long. We've had some that are much longer, but that seems to be a really robust length. So they kick off in
That seems
spring.
doable, though. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're meeting every maybe, let's say on average 3 weeks for an all day on a Saturday throughout that time. So yeah, it's not, you know, it's not a full-time job, but it's also not a one-off thing. And I think that gets back to some of what Calista was talking about as well, that repeated contact, which is what really solidifies the relationships. As for community partner organizations, each program has a theme that's connected to something that is going on, that's an issue, an urgent issue in that community at that time. For example, this year, our program in Southern Oregon, if you follow the Supreme Court, you know that housing and homelessness are a huge issue in Southern Oregon right now, as they are many places, but it's a very polarizing issue in that location. And so our program is focused on housing and homelessness. So our community partner organizations are community-based organizations that are working on that issue. We also have in Pennsylvania, our program this year is very heavily mental health focused. So we have NAMI of Central PA as one of our partners, a mental health services organization that's in a different county, that kind of thing, a suicide prevention organization.
Those examples are helpful. Yeah. So now folks always want to know, like, well, what is a success? How has this really impacted communities? So tell us about that. How are these Uniting for Action civic hubs measuring success in improving bridging and belonging?
Yeah, great question. And it's hard, right? I mean, it's a slippery thing to measure, which is one of the things that makes More in Common's work so impressive, is that they're able to measure things that the rest of us would sort of throw up our hands and say, I have no idea how to measure that. We do try, though. So we have pre and post program surveys for very long programs, sometimes mid-program surveys as well, that track changes in all of the things you were just talking about, feelings of belonging, attitudes, as well as skills, the skills around joint problem solving and conflict management and stuff. So that's useful for getting quantitative information on that, and all of those markers are good. I can talk about that in a minute. But then it's at least equally useful to collect stories. So we have focus group discussions, interviews with participants to better understand people's personal experiences with our programs and how it has changed them. And then through the change in them, how that's impacted their communities. For example, we have in a program a couple of years ago, there was an elected school board member in the program, and during the course of the program, another member of the cohort was also elected to the same school board. These two people are on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but by the time she got elected, he was already on the board. They'd formed they trusted each other, they liked each other, they trusted each other, they'd been working together, and they changed the dynamics on the school board by being friends. Like, they refused to retreat to their little corners and vote along these. And the school board, which had been pretty dysfunctional, frankly, started to be able to make decisions again. So, but that's not a story you would learn from a pre and post program survey.
Right.
So we collect those stories that way as well. And then it's also really important to make sure that our community partners are having a positive experience. And so we talk to them, we collect information from them about the impact that the programs have had on them. And that's also been really positive.
Great.
Yeah, so some of the quantitative info there, I won't read it to you, but basically across all of our programs, we see increases in participants' belief that yes, you can do this, and yes, it will work. So belief that people can come together across differences and that doing so can have a positive impact in their community. And then qualitatively, we see just decreases in polarization and animosity. I mean, there's the story I just talked about, but there are many other examples, and increases in belonging, which, you know, I'll wrap up with that because it's one of the themes of this webinar. I guess like end of last year, our Oregon program for last year was wrapping up, and one of our team members was sitting at lunch during the program, and one of the Uniners, one of the program participants, was sitting next to him. This was a recent immigrant from Nigeria, and he was living in this rural or Southern Oregon community. And he said, basically, like, when he started this program, he really felt like he didn't belong in this community in Southern Oregon, but through working with his team and implementing their project, now he understood that he really does belong in that community in Southern Oregon. And so that's a very powerful example, I think, of how making those kinds of connections really can have a big impact.
Absolutely. And I'm just curious, before we segue to Q&A, Kara, if you have a chance to revisit some of these programs that maybe they were done with the really intensive part of their work a year later or 2 years later, to sort of see what things have lingered, or what capacities and relationships have maybe moved on to tackle another community issue.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is, I think, the next phase of our data collection effort. We have a relatively new, she's not new to the organization, but she wasn't in this role previously, who does our evidence and learning. And she, I know, is going to be tracking that out, you know, past the end of programs, which we should be able to do. We keep in pretty close touch with our program alumni. I will say that the qualitative piece is much easier because we're still in touch with everybody.
Yeah.
Right? So I haven't given them a survey, but the fact that they stay engaged with our organization, that they show up at our events, people who've done our programs in the past, I think that they really kind of are becoming advocates for this kind of work, suggests that, yeah, it does have a longitudinal impact.
Yeah, thank you so much. And here's information. More folks want to contact Kara or find out more about Urban Rural Action. So thank you so much for being with us. You know, as we've mentioned, the More in Common report features lots of examples like the Urban Rural Action program. This was one that when I first spoke with Calista, I'm like, I really want to get them on this webinar because it is hard to really build that muscle of intentionally building relationships with people that we think are not like-minded. Yeah, we've kind of socialized that out, unfortunately. Wonderful. Well, Risa, I am really excited because I think we've got a good chunk of time, maybe just short of 10 minutes for Q&A. And it looks like the Q&A box has been busy, so I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Kira. Thank you, Calista. This has been amazing so far. And yes, the questions are pouring in. We will not have time to get to every single one of them. So we encourage all of you to stay for our discussion group so we can keep going on these while we're together. But I'm going to start with one that both of you can answer. This was a similar question asked for each of you, which is how you recruited. So for Callista, how did you recruit for participants to respond to your surveys, participate in that? And for Kira, the recruitment process, especially someone wants to know for those further right on the political spectrum that sometimes in this person's experience are more difficult to recruit. So Callista first, then Kira, as briefly as possible so we can get to as many questions as we can.
Sure, of course. So we worked with an international polling company, YouGov, to get our sample of 4,500 US adults. It's a representative sample of the population. And then we also worked with partners on the ground in our regional areas, and we worked with another recruitment company, ROI Rocket, to recruit our participants for our focus groups.
Kira.
We do not do that. Um, it's a great question, and it's hard, although the political thing is maybe less hard than I think some organizations have struggled with. It really, our recruitment relies on our local networks. So our county coordinators who are residents of the county that they're working in and are engaged in the community. That doesn't mean they're necessarily leaders like officially in their community, but they're trusted messengers within their community, within their own networks. And so they do a lot of recruiting by mouth. As well as our community partner organizations. They also recruit through their networks and their channels. It's really variable. We are very conscientious about making sure our program leadership is as diverse and balanced as we expect our cohort to be. And consequently, we have plenty of people on the right in program leadership. And so we tend to get plenty of people on the right applying for our programs.
That's beautiful. Walking the talk and just making sure that you're modeling what we're all trying to see happen. Thank you very much. We've also had a question. People know that people want to get involved. People want to be part of this, and you all have demonstrated that, and we're seeing that in other places too. And one of the questions was really what would you recommend for people, especially who are kind of in local regions, to figure out who's working on this issue so they can get involved? Either of you.
I'm not sure I fully understood the question. Who's working on, you mean who's running programs like this?
Who's running programs like this? Who are doing things that are really helping to address the disconnection
Maybe
issue?
to kind of get the pool of the partners that you mentioned, there needs to be across counties and across types of organizations. Like you mentioned one sort of local organizer, like an agency that's working on the issue that they think is a challenge, but are there other types of ways to find that network?
Mhm.
So, okay, are we talking about the organizations like the local service organizations that we partner with? That is similar to recruiting Uniters in the sense that you have to use local connections to figure out who's doing the work. Local community foundations are an excellent, I know New Pierce was going to pipe up in the chat. I was going to mention listen first, Pierce. But for community partner organizations, community foundations are a great source of information and support, but also just the community itself. So I cannot stress enough, you can't just helicopter in and expect this to work. You've got to be embedded in the community and know people there for a long time. If what we're talking about is organizations like Urban Rural Action doing this kind of work, then yes, Listen First Project knows everybody's on their list. Just hit their website and you'll find out everyone.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to add, so in our report at the end, we have a resources for stakeholders section. And so we go through and we list resources for community leaders, for government leaders, for people in philanthropy, and for individuals, because we are all stakeholders in this. And so I highly recommend that you take a look at all of those resources. We have resources to practice some of the skills that we were talking about, to reduce intergroup anxiety. So deep listening skills, other constructive disagreement skills. And then also I'd really encourage everyone on this call to look for ways that they can create more moments of connection in their own lives, and also reach out to people beyond just their immediate circle of friends and family and invite them in as well. We can create these opportunities every day ourselves too. That's really important. So, and it's really important if you do that to know that you have a whole movement and field of people who are supporting you, who are cheering you on. We all really, we can rebuild our culture of connection from the bottom up if we all step in to participate.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. There are questions in here just about like some different barriers that people and anticipate are issues, and would love to hear your thinking on those. So one is around this barrier of challenging communication. So the idea that sometimes we think we've communicated clearly, or someone thinks they've understood clearly, and then the reality is there wasn't a clear understanding. So that's sort of, communication understanding barrier. And then there's another one just around, some of the barriers to bring people together who speak different languages, or, sort of come from very, very different backgrounds. So best practices about bridging people that are, from refugee, immigrant, migrant backgrounds to those who, aren't coming from those same backgrounds. So those two might have a similar answer. I'm just curious what either of you think about those.
Sure. So there are lots of best practices that I could talk about, but to address your question related to like literally language barriers, we, in our work in Kansas City, we found this amazing neighborhood association that had their goal, again, they were bringing people together to work on a common goal in their community, which was to restore these blighted homes in their neighborhood. And it just so happened that this neighborhood was one of the most racially and socioeconomically diverse neighborhoods in Kansas City. And so they engaged their community to help do this, to come together to build blighted homes. And they just realized, oh, well, we need to actually have translators in the room. And so they got translators in the room, which was really cool. And it worked. And people kept showing up, and the neighborhood was really transformed. I think they restored like more than 40 homes. So, which brings me to another important point, which is that these types of connections require investment and funding. So philanthropy has a role to play in this. Government leaders have a role to play in this too. If you really want to facilitate meaningful connection across some I don't know how to describe bigger areas of difference, it does need investment. And so that's really important.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting that you can answer that question with like, literally we don't speak the same language, or like we are all speaking English, but we are not, we're missing each other. Yeah, even though we do have English language learners and folks whose first language is not English in our programs, that's less of an issue for us. But the second thing is very much of an issue, people talking and thinking, I like to say it's not what you say, it's what they hear, right? And so our foundational tool is the ABCs of constructive conversation, where A stands for ask. So leading with a question, that piece of like coming to the conversation from a stance of curiosity about the other person, as opposed to a stance of like, I'm going to beat you into understanding me, is key. So the A is key. And then we skip B and go straight to C, which is check your understanding. And if you're genuinely curious about someone's perspective and it's different from your own, you will naturally check your understanding, because they'll say something and you won't really get it, right? You'll be like, well, is this what you're saying? Or can you give me an example? And so I think intentionally practicing those two skills, which is a thing that we do a lot in our programs, really builds that muscle to where you notice if maybe you're not speaking the same language as someone else, and you can figure out what they mean anyway. And then B, coming back to the B, is break down your own view, which is to say, express your own opinion in a way that the other person can hear you, not just that you feel good for having vented. And that also, I think, is a skill that can be learned.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And there's more to be found on your websites and in your reports. Thank you so much to both of you. This has been fantastic. I really, really appreciate it. We're going to end the Q&A now, but I do encourage people to hang on. And if you're able to stay in the discussion group, we will have definitely more of that. Let me share my screen. Share. One moment. Okay. I am not fast at this, y'all. You just have to give me one moment. Oh, I just clicked off, did I not? All right, hang on. It's gonna work. We're gonna do this again. Okay. All right. This is not working. All right, we're gonna skip that part. Oh, there it is. Just when I say no, there it is. Isn't that lovely? All right, thank you so much. What we want to do is let you all know about our upcoming next webinar, which is on the topic of improving community safety through social connections. That is July 30th, and there is a registration link in the chat box now. We are going to welcome Ruben Cantu, who is on the call today. Thank you, Ruben, who is the Director of Safety and Wellbeing for Prevention Institute, and we are very close to announcing our second presenter as well, so stay tuned for that. This is going to be a very exciting webinar. And then the discussion group is happening very momentarily after we close. We are going to have the link for the discussion group here for you. There it is in the chat. This is where we engage with each other to do some deeper learning. It's a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. So you'll need to disconnect from here momentarily and then join us over there. And this is for some peer learning as well and peer networking. So we do invite you to join us for that. And lastly, just please stay connected with us, up to date on all of our news and events that we have. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, our YouTube channel, and connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to stay connected to you. We'd love to hear from you. So we invite you to hang on with us in those ways as well. And you'll be hearing from us with the link to the